until
Hello, Martin. Martin, I'm here. I was multitasking.
you were multitasking. Are you on your treadmill again? Hmm.
No, no, no. I don't do the treadmill. You've been saying that for 4 years. You caught me one time on the treadmill when it couldn't be helped.
Yeah,
But
but
no,
that's engraved in my remembrance forever, Michael.
well, yeah, but your finger is engraved in mine. And when you hurt your knee, I picture you lifting 400 kilograms with your finger or with your bad knee or whatever you tore up when you were in your contest. So
Yes.
we all have our avatars. I'm going to change my Audi, by the way. I've got some cool ones of the B2 on its way to Iran with an
Ah.
F-35 escorting on one wing and an F-22 escorting on the other. You know that for the last couple of weeks, I've been totally surrounded by emails and team meetings and all kinds of warmongers in my aerospace world.
Yeah, but
So,
that's good because then you're still useful, right? At your age.
well, I'm still on the FAMICA team, failure mode and criticality analysis. So I'm going to
How
be
old
on
are
that the
you?
rest.
How old are you in the meantime?
I'm going to be 75 next month.
Woohoo! That's very cool. So you become one of my life models.
Well, I walk 50 miles a month on a treadmill, but I don't do it during our 4x4
See,
anymore.
treadmill again. Are you on the treadmill, Michael?
No, I do 50 miles a month, and the Heart Association president was my heart cardiologist for my
Yeah.
heart valve 15 years ago. So I'm a student of the valves in the heart if you ever need one, Martin.
Okay, cool. Interesting because I'm programming AI for health reasons because I'm just recovering from a metabolic syndrome. Okay, for the Christina and Christoph that are here, Michael and I, we know us for years already, and we tease each other because of what we do. Yeah, and Michael is quite a famous guy. He is an inventor, innovator, and has patents on his own, and is now, among others, involved. I mean, I need to repeat that, Michael. Sorry, I don't want to discriminate you because I think this is an example for many. At age 75, you're running simulations for F-35 project, which is a fighter plane from the US. And
Well, not simulations, Martin. Other people at Pratt and Whitney and Lockheed Martin do those. No, but I was lead fuel system integration engineer for the pumps on the gearbox run by the engine.
yeah,
So there's a FAMICA team, failure mode and criticality analysis, but
yes,
there's a whole story for engineers in the group someday.
yeah.
We'll
I reckon Joe would be interested, I believe, because I mean, Joe, you are very young. What's your age?
Measly 36.
See, so you're even 40, not even 50% of Michael's age, and you're 24 years.
And also statistically past half a lifetime.
Well, but Joe and I spoke about escapes. So TRL, Martin, to use your jargon, readiness level.
Yes,
We've got escape teams for readiness, and there's all sorts of aerospace stories that should never have made the market because the TRL people had too many escapes, and for money reasons or bureaucracy
okay,
or political reasons.
okay.
Yeah,
Just now
yeah.
to help our listeners. Um, I always say we never use acronyms because then this becomes a slang and a language, and no one who comes in from outside would understand. So can you please, because I believe what you just said is very, very, very interesting. Can you please explain what you just said in simple words so that someone who doesn't know what TRL is would understand what you
Yes,
just told in
Martin.
that
Well,
context?
Martin, you've got freedom to operate. So you've got FTB and TRL. So TRL is an approach where you go to customers, you do alpha teams. That if Rich McDonald were here, so you're basically wondering, are you ready to launch this product into production? And put it in front of customers whose lives could depend on it, whether it be airbags for your car out there. So TRL is a concept that's used by many companies around the world.
It,
And
it
it
stands for
basically
technology readiness level.
technology readiness level, and it also ties closely with risk assessment. So the FAMICA team, failure mode and effect and criticality analysis teams, also work with TRL teams, and they decide what's the risk. So what's the risk of you being a skydiver, Martin, and living to be age 100, doing a jump every year? So you can assign risk to anything, and of course in industries like aerospace, or even the risk of getting electrocuted with your hair dryer in your house, so risk assessment, TRL, and failure mode and criticality analysis plays the what if game. If the engine falls off the airplane, how many people are going to die? And
Mm-hmm.
what happened in India, sadly, there's hundreds of engineers still trying to figure out what really happened that brought that plane down 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. So as was what I understand is Joe is more enthusiastic about risk in total and Excel sheets in that context.
Well, I'm excited about risk because I don't think that there's a single document your company could make that a risk assessment wasn't a governing document that said you needed it. So risk always says that you need an extra step, procedure, a bill of materials, a standard operating procedure, a spare parts list. Everything comes from risk. So if you're
Yes.
going to have governing documents, risk is the one everything can generate from. And when we're doing databases, I'm starting to say that risk is your single source of truth, where all your data spawns from risk. So you have
Okay.
something that you want to meet a user requirement. We talked about escapes. I think Michael shared, hey, there's a part. The part gets given to a manufacturer and says, this part is going to go to this temperature. Make the part. But there was an escape. The escape didn't include that the part was going to go to outer space, so that it was going to be under vacuum. So it was going to be at that temperature under vacuum. So they make the part, and the part fails because it boiled out some of the metals to the atmosphere of vacuum, and so it changed weights. And so the plane explodes because the part wasn't made for the escape of the requirement. And so when you get this feedback loop, you say, well, it is a risk to have parts that aren't made for vacuum. You end up changing your requirement for the part, saying the part must handle being able to go out to vacuum. And so risk is your iterative, your regression process to define new user requirements.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, very well said, Joe. There's another term, Martin, for the group. It's called compliance. So on TRL, very often you'll have a compliance team that does exactly what Joe just said. So you take all your requirements, you line them up against all the things that can happen in terms of a component or the system design. You go to a design review and everyone says, yes, we're in compliance. So let's go to market. Let's start producing this thing. But yeah, compliance is a big part of it. And if you have an escape, it says it's usually caught by the compliance team, and either by calculation, by similarity, or by test, you realize that this component doesn't have the correct design to meet the requirements. That's what an escape is all about. And people can die during that process if you go to market too quickly and the plane crashes.
But why is it called escape? That sounds to me like a jail and someone would run away.
Because in
Well,
computer
go ahead,
science,
Joe.
you may have like I would call them a state machine, meaning that you're only ever in the predicted states. And an escape is outside of your prediction. It escaped from prediction. So once you add in a failure mode and say, hey, the plane could blow up in this way because of that part, well, now it's a new state that it could end up in. It's not unidentified. But escapes, if I'm right, are the situations you don't want to occur. So we don't want the plane to blow up. So we don't want to create a part that can go that direction. We don't
Okay.
want it to escape the system we want it to run within.
That's a very, how to say, a a very system theory way of looking at things.
Yeah, you don't want it to escape.
It's an engineering approach, Martin.
Yeah. I happen to be an engineer, and I even studied system theory. So, but I have never heard that slang word escape to define you are running a system in outside its specifications, right? In other words, right?
Well, the
Correct.
whole process of a design review is just to identify the challenges within the potential of a problem, right? And where that problem could arise, and what's the likelihood of that, and what's the severity of that problem.
Okay, understood.
Yeah,
Understood. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I learn new things every time I run this here. Just like last week, I don't know, but I found this mind-boggling, because I just wanted to repeat, because it was working in me for 1 week. So we had Frank Mattes last week, and he's the author of the book Now and New, is about the incumbents and innovation and so, but he gave a talk at the university, at the business school, and he found a way to address risk, so to navigate the Ansoff matrix that I've never heard before. And I had also a discussion with Christoph Hering. He's also here. Hi, Christoph. We had a discussion two days ago, and you asked me what to do when we want to do, if someone wants to do non-incremental innovation, right? This was your question. And since you asked me that question, and I was also pondering Frank Mattes' review about how to navigate the Ansoff matrix which is from do market penetration to do diversification, which diversification comes in related or unrelated diversification, and diversification is very closely linked to non-incremental innovation. And now I have a new way to address this, because he was using the business model canvas system for telling people whether or not a new initiative would be located in the market penetration quadrant of the Ansoff matrix, or in the diversification, or in one of the other two, which is product development or innovative marketing. And I find this mind-opening. So as I learned today what an escape is in risk management and compliance, so did I learn last week how to navigate the gray areas between the 4 quadrants. And I don't know what this did with you, but I believe at least Rich, it made a big impression on you. Did you talk with Frank in the meantime?
And Martin, there is a risk 4 quadrant Ansoff matrix. Risk category 4, unacceptable. Risk category 1, great. Keep going.
Say, Martin, here for the group. So this was the Bible at UTC. We were called ACE, Achieving Competitive Excellence. So the definition goes back to IBM 50 years ago. Quality escapes are nothing more than the inability to manage the details. Not surprisingly, the root causes of numerous quality escapes are found in the flow and interpretation of technical requirements. These root causes often take the form of ambiguity in the original requirements documents, failure to adequately evaluate the results of requirements interpretation, or simply overlooking the requirements. That's the definition that people use for what is an escape.
Okay, I've never heard that before in my lifetime.
Well, it's complicated. I could send it to you for your bookshelf, but yeah, it's not as simple as an egress, a fire escape on a building. There's a quality interpretation.
Yeah, but
it's
I
basically
didn't know that
screwing up on.
this is a term that is a loaded. In Singapore, you would say this is a loaded term. I didn't know that.
Well, there's another thing, Martin. Here, get your requirements done once. so that you only do your design once, so that you don't have to do your design multiple times when you have escapes. So if your requirements are well done, you won't have any escapes and you won't have any problems with quality.
Okay, understood.
Easy to say, but hard to do.
But I still wanted to hear Rich's opinion on the talk last week, and it's because for me this is a fundamental game changer.
Well, hearing Frank's talk and his commentary, and I also read his book, prior to that, so it all sort of flowed together for me. But if you haven't read his book, I highly encourage you that you do. It's an excellent read, and it'll give you some perspectives that maybe that you aren't aware of. But anytime that you look at an Ansoff matrix, risk is a factor that needs to be taken into consideration. And depending on the type of organization you are, risk is paramount, right? And as an example, my former company, risk was always a big issue, not only for product development purposes, as Joe and Michael have been talking about and describing, but also, from a market exposure and marketing and business development perspective. And going back to Frank's, comments, I just felt that, Frank was, enlightened us all, frankly, including myself on, a number of points that he made. And, he's, very talented in that regard. So I think a lot of him and his book, and his book is excellent. But if you look at some of the, the exhibits that he has in his book, and you start to think about, all the things that we've been talking about, for the last 4 years here, they all flow together, right?
Yes.
And they complement one another. His Ansoff matrix is different from the one that, the 4-quadrant that we've been talking about, because it's, been expanded. And, it's used in the same way, but also slightly differently, right? Because, he's talking about the business model perspective. He's talking about, not just the product development aspects, right? So, and then the business model, canvas, bringing that in to, complement that, which is, genius, frankly.
Yes.
I thought that was brilliant.
Yes.
And, I never thought about that before, but, it's, I think that's really appropriate, and I like what he did. And, his book sort of gets into, some of that rationale and some of the background that you need to do that.
Yes.
So, again, I thought it was great. And
Yeah. Because, then I was thinking, I mean, Christoph, I discussed with Christoph about innovation for service companies, because companies that do not build products and can follow on your feet. I mean, for example, my own company, right? My law firm, if you want to say so, we move into the product area. We productize our legal services and sell them as products with deliverables and our input more than whatever. So, and the question is now, how does a service company that has worked for decades on a standard, because there was a need for certain services maybe 50 years ago or 100 years ago, and law schools prepared us for providing these services, and suddenly this old model doesn't work anymore because AI solves many of the problems of law firms. And so and Chris and I, we were discussing about the different type of law firm. I mean, business support firm, and then he asked me, hey, what would you do first? What is the first step to get the company on a new S curve? And he said, well, I find it very interesting that you use S curve for service companies. And I said, yes, of course I do, because the same applies to service companies. And then I was thinking, how would I define non-incremental innovation versus incremental innovation? And as an engineer, it's very simple, because a non-incremental innovation in a product is that you use textbook engineering for answering the question. And for example, you build a device that has a housing, and the housing has a window for watching something that is going on in the housing, a mechanism or so, and the product is painted in red, and suddenly the sales shows up and says, hey, I could sell 500 of those if you give me the housing in green, but the window must be at a different location. And then what happens is that the production manager would assign someone to calculate the costs for doing that, and then lay out the management tool for including the manufacture of those 500 devices. And for me, that is a typical incremental product development, because you don't need it. I believe you don't even need to have an engineering degree or even a vocational degree in order to do so, because you just need to look around a bit. Where do I source my green color instead of the red, and what can I do in order to cut out the window at a different place? So it's more something like common sense. But if you have a non-incremental innovation, I always use the example of the Mannesmann steel tube company in the 80s of the last century, deciding that they would build up a mobile phone network. And then suddenly this steel tube company for industrial steel tubes had to build up a team for making mobile phones. And I believe with all right, I can say that this is a non-incremental innovation. But these two are very extreme examples. There exist many more initiatives in between, and where to put those in the Ansoff matrix. And the Ansoff matrix in practice doesn't have clear borders between the four areas. There is a gray area, and how to put it. And Frank Mattes was the first guy that I've ever heard who brought up a criteria to say, okay, one, you can still digest and you're still in your market penetration. Two, a bit more difficult, but if you change 3 of the 9 areas of the business model canvas, then you're clearly no longer in market penetration. And I found that revolutionary. Christoph, what's your take? You were there.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about interesting how you picked up my idea. So in general, my challenge at the moment is to create new services for our organization. And in our organization, we basically just have customer services. So we are organizing trade fairs for our customers. So we are organizing travel tours. We're helping them to connect with business partners. So we are doing an introduction between different companies. So these are all of our standard services that we're offering for many, many years. But we are getting challenged now by AI agents and other platforms who can do this type of work a lot easier. So that's why we are now starting to also spend more time to think about what will be our services look like in the next 5 years. How does the demand of our customers change? Yeah, I think looking for new S-curves is really an interesting challenge now.
And this is why I love risk at the center of the S-curve, that when you identify a new risk and you take an action that either solves the severity of the risk for your customer, the occurrence rate of the risk for your customer, or that you can detect the risk for your customer, then you have something that you're offering your customer. If it's not doing one of those three things, you're just making spaghetti and throwing it on the wall.
Yeah. So in very short words, Christoph, I was very cautious to not reveal any information that hints towards the nature of what we have discussed. So you were the one who brought in the specific services we are talking about. I would like to highlight that because I mean this is a public discussion group, and as being a lawyer, I'm always very cautious with what I tell in public. But I believe in if we stay as general as I was, I believe it's okay. So I hope that you were not personally offended by bringing this
No
up.
problem. All
Say,
good.
Martin, there's a marketing concept for your services idea. So the marketing concept, Rich and other business types in the audience are probably aware of it. It's called shared demand and derived demand. So the example I like to use with clients is the electric motor industry. So you're making electric motors. So services, Martin Schweiger comes out of Singapore and says, gee, let's rebuild these motors. So that's a shared demand. Your product and your services go together like ham and eggs. Now, derived demand would be, Martin, you step up to the motor company, you say, aha, let's get into the copper wire business. So if you're making motors, you're going to backward integrate. You're going to buy your supplier that makes your copper wire. You're going to take that copper wire to your service business because you're going to rewind electric motor armatures. You see. So as a marketer, the idea of services in the world of industrial capital equipment, especially, it's called MRO, maintenance, repair, and overhaul. So I always have to use acronyms and define them in the future for you, Martin. But I'm sure in your gearing world, you've heard of the idea of MRO. So there's your services. And MRO, in many cases, it's not only maintenance, repair, and overhaul, it can also be called replacement. So the aftermarket comes from the, the, the service that's not going to be what the customer needs. What the customer needs is a new motor, not a rebuilt motor. So they all kind of go together in the same realm of business opportunities to make more money.
You wanted to say something, Christoph?
No, all good.
Okay, because your microphone went on, so and then you popped up, so I thought you wanted to say something. So no, but if you take the teaching of Frank of last week and apply it to the question, what can I? So there is someone here realized that his business will die if they don't get a new S-curve, which you only get by non-incremental innovation, because by definition, along the S-curve, all innovation is incremental. So if you want to get a new S-curve, I believe this is best done in a trial and error way, iterative. And the first thing that a company would need for that is something that Bruce Wojcik would call a serial innovator. And a serial innovator is a very special person that works in the company. And that special person has enough experience to see patterns in a specific area. And that person also comes with a number of personality traits, many of them being the personality traits of an entrepreneur. But one personality trait being to be risk shy, entrepreneurial risk shy. These people don't want to take the risk of an entrepreneur, but they have all the other traits. And Bruce says in an organization of one, there is in a business of one, there is one of those. In a business of where 10 people are, there's one. 100, still one. 1,000, maybe 2 or 3, but not more. Not 10. In a business of 10,000, 0 to 1, because they all leave because they're frustrated by the bureaucracy. So serial innovators get easily frustrated by bureaucracy. Christoph, that may play a role in your area. So I I imagine that if that organization is too bureaucratic, then the bureaucracy would kill innovation. That's my guess. And it comes from the definition of the personality of the person to start with, which is the serial innovator. And then the next insight that I had over the many years is innovation is never made in a committee. Innovation is always made by one single guy who has the freedom to assemble his own team according to his own taste or whatever, what he thinks fit. And that also brings up something that a serial innovator, someone who drives innovation, would be someone who had successes before in doing the same thing. Is never someone who comes fresh and then jumps in and then suddenly this is the guy who is he may be creative, yes, but he may not have all the 4 traits that are required for this serial innovator. And one of the traits is to be politically savvy. And after that, the next step would be to endeavor on a journey where the real needs of the target markets are. Successful innovation is never starts with a gadget view where you say, I have a very cool technology and I can use the technology for something. And now let's find a market for what I'm developing. The serial innovator always works the other way around from, is this a problem worth to put my time for? And if not, then they would just not address that problem. And I've seen that in my practice with inventors often, on a daily basis almost. And if that is the case, then a stage gate or a phase gate approach would help, where you start small and then increase the input. For example, as mentioned in the Lean Startup book by Eric Ries. It's quite a fundamental book. So if I would look for an approach to get a new S-curve, this is the way and the sequence that I would look for. But I'm now throwing it over to you all. And what is your take? Does it make sense to you, or do you have a better approach?
Personally, I think, Martin, for me, I look at software development and product development. And when I say product, I'm talking about hard tech product, developing a new bicycle, developing a new shopping cart, developing, something other than a piece of software, right? And the lean startup, and it's funny that, because in Frank's book, he even mentions that the adoption of lean startup has been adopted by 95% of the companies out there, right? And whether they be a software or a hardware and non-computer hardware kind of company. And I've always had a problem with that, because the lean startup, there's a lot of tools there that are certainly valuable, and we at my former company, we adopted some of those tool sets and put them in strategies and put those into our, as you'd like to call it, a phase gate system. We called it a stage gate system, and into our stage gate at the appropriate interval. And I think that works really well, right? One of those is, prototyping early, right? And getting customer feedback early to see if you're onto something and see if, the problem you've identified is really worth solving. And, that's critical in any product development. So those are my comments, but I think that there's a very fine line there that people are blurring between software development and the tool sets and just thinking that they can apply that to anything, when you really need to augment a more traditional product development, cycle and stage gate system with some of the lean startup tools.
Yes. Yeah, sure. I mean, is a fine line. Yes, it's true, but you need to start somewhere, right? And it's also a trial and error, so it's not really there's no no surefire method of getting a new S curve. Otherwise, there wouldn't be bankrupt companies, right? So
Yeah, and I think your 4x4 is a very, lucid example of a way to have um, a very structured system on, product development. And I mean, it touches on the, key aspects that, like FTO and,
yes,
uh, IP and so on and so forth, that and customer discovery and customer validation that, is critical, right? And I think that, what you did in your book is really insightful, and that can be bolted on to, a phase gate system.
it is a phase gate system in itself, and you can
Yeah, of course,
send it to whatever phase gate you have. I believe that the phase gate is not a bad approach. Although I know some hate it because it's a structure that 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 provides bureaucracy, which in turn, I said earlier, would drive serial innovators away. But it helps you to not forget important thing, and nobody forces you into every box of the matrix of the 4x4. But yeah, yeah. No,
What you have to remember in a phase gate system is that, you know, at each stage of the phase gate, there's different people involved.
yes,
And you need to break that down by swim lane, as we call it. And that swim lane is, marketing and manufacturing and quality and production and so on and so forth, R&D. And each of those has a role with the vertical, stages that you go through, and they come in and out of that phase gate as you go through that journey, right?
yes,
And that's critical to understand, and that's rarely talked about in literature, frankly.
yes, yes, yes. Yeah, I
Say,
can.
Martin,
Yes, go
Martin,
ahead.
I'd like to jump in. This is a new concept for the group for 4 years. Okay. I want to call it S curves that are sequential and not necessarily on your XY plot, a new S curve, but the example I used with a client here just last week. So the big S curve was electronics on cars. Okay. So let's say prior to 1950, even the radio was vacuum tube. So electronics on a car, big S curve. Now, off of that S curve, as it matured, it didn't really go away, but electronic ignition came along. Okay. And this is in a timeline, 50 years, 60 years. After electronic ignition, suddenly said, let's do electronic fuel injection. Then someone said, let's just put a computer called an ECU managing both fuel injection and ignition. Then someone said, let's do infotainment. So the radio became a CD player. Then someone said, let's put in a car phone. So the big S curve, the big mega trend is electronics on cars. And there's probably no end to it, right? Driverless cars might be a new S curve, but there are so many tangential ones that come off of the big S curve. Another giant S curve might be nuclear power. In Joe's world, it might be software for process control. That's
Yes,
the big S curve that 50 years ago, 100 years ago, there was pneumatic valves in a refinery, not electronically controlled stepper motor valves. So keep in mind as you go on with your thought on S curves and innovation, Martin, the big mega changes, PCs, phones. I mean, the big ones are easy to identify in our world, and especially when you look back, digital photography. 70 years ago, it got started, but it really didn't take off until film photography disappeared. But then after that, I mean, no one buys a Canon camera anymore because your iPhone is almost as good as $1,000 Nikon or Canon camera. So, the marketer in the room might put on a hat that says, gee whiz, watch for the big mega trends. But once there's an S curve, there's thousands of companies and innovations that build upon each of them. And I think our car out there is a prime example.
Yeah. Okay. I would like to get a new point up. We have Jürgen Brügel here, and he mentioned to me already 2 weeks ago that he wants to talk about the turkey illusion. Jürgen, are you ready for that, or do we discuss about something else? You need to
Sure.
unmute your microphone, Jürgen.
Yes. I mean, if it was for me like an eye opener, I never heard about it, and I realized this thing is yeah, an an principle where humans or we all fall for. I haven't prepared. I need.
I mean, in short words, if you want to share with us, you can also give us some insight, and then we talk about it next time. I don't think that you need much preparation. You're a smart guy, but I can also throw in something
Okay.
else.
No. Fine, fine. I mean, the turkey illusion is that the turkey feels very well. He's being fed, and his owner is very nice to him, and it's warm, and so on. He, this goes well for 347 days. And then there is Thanksgiving. And so the turkey illusion is basically this principle that people take their past experience and say that this, as it was already for in the turkey example, 347 days, it worked fine. So it still will go work fine for the rest of my life. But the takeaway is we definitely need to take massive impacts into consideration. Even if it's unlikely, you should have a plan if whatever you get a stroke tomorrow and you can't go to work anymore. It's just an example.
Yes, there's a a very famous story. Actually, it's called Eddie the Bartender, and it was written about 100 years ago in the time of the prohibition, where sale of alcohol was forbidden.
Mhm.
And Eddie the bartender was in that short story was described as someone who was very swift and very good in what he did, and he was really thriving in his business of a bartender. And at that time, it seems that the bartenders even worked already in the morning to save or to recover people from the hangover of the evening before. And they had various ways to do that with and without alcohol. And so goes the story. And maybe because there's no more copyright, I could even publish it I will publish it on a LinkedIn group, in the 4x4 LinkedIn group. And people know that there will be prohibition. And they were discussing with him, and he found all sorts of excuses to not talk about it or to postpone thinking about it. And that's a bit the turkey illusion way, right? Because the story doesn't say what happened to Eddie the bartender. It just said that until the last day before the prohibition, he went there pretending that nothing will happen, and it happened, as we all know, right? And he surely lost his job as a bartender because there was nothing left to be done for these people. So, but it was a story about the final 100 days of a bartender before the prohibition came in and destroyed the job. Is this in the same league, in the same area, Jürgen?
Exactly. It's a cognitive bias describing the surprise resulting from a break in a trend. And sometimes people don't want to see the trend, even if it's already written on the wall. But for one, people think it will go on because the last years it worked as well. But people need definitely to rethink their attitude to trends because this can have a certain sudden a break and well, and then what now? So it's one thing about personal resilience. If something is working well, or and what is if it does not, um, it's not guaranteed. So this turkey illusion is also quite often used in investments. So, for example, what do we take as an example? Oh, ETFs. ETFs was a safe thing, and it will always go up and always go up. And then Trump came along, and big problem. And there are a lot of examples in. Um, Kodak is also one of these turkey illusions. the, and when you think about it, it's quite interesting to rethink your thinking.
Well, Jürgen, okay,
Yes.
not only Kodak, there are two or three big ones that happened in my lifetime. Ethel Corporation hung their entire hat on lead and gasoline. And if you talk to people that lost their lives savings by investing in Ethel stock or what have you, and so and the other one, of course, we talked about, Martin, and that's asbestos. So if you're making anything temperature, exhaust gaskets for your car, anything asbestos, ceiling tile, all of a sudden the heavy hand of your freedom to operate, Martin, it's called the government. So both of those, of course, Kodak didn't lose their shorts because of the government. They lost it on technology. But the other two had no alternative technology. The oil companies were scrambling to get the octane up with other additives or just better refining that costs more money. And of course, asbestos, there's many substitute products for brakes and clutches on cars, but it took 10 or 20 years to come up with alternatives to asbestos. There really aren't any. And now, of course, lithium batteries, that's a whole global thing. But there's some big ones, Jürgen, and I like your comments.
Thank you.
Bunch of turkeys, let's call them that.
I also like it because you see that currently in Germany all over the place, right? I mean, for German living in Germany, that thinking must resonate with a lot of things that you see on a daily basis, inclusive the how secure is your own pension.
Exactly. And if you think that the IFO Institute, this is what is now a research institute for finance and economy, they are predicting in the next 5 years 140,000 lost positions in the car industry in Germany.
That's not sufficient because we know that now 75% of the cars produced in Germany go into export, and we also know that the export will or is currently just dropped by Trump's tax by by 15%, because 15% of the German cars went to the US. And that is now, I saw a new price comparison with US, the cars in the US. German cars all went up by 20% at least. And the most expensive ones became the BMWs. So I believe that would reduce the car export from Germany to the US by, I would say, 90%. Yeah, is realistic. And that 15% is stands for 150,000 jobs in the car industry themselves, which means in the OEMs, in the car makers. But for each job in the car industry with the makers, there are 3 jobs outside in the suppliers. And those
Correct.
jobs would also go away. So your 150,000 are not 150,000, they are 600,000. And that's
Yes,
only
totally correct.
only what happened in 1 week in April, when Trump said that now the German cars are 15% or 20% more expensive because of the and of course BMW can build the same cars in the US, but the jobs in Germany are gone. I mean, there may be new jobs in the US, which is good, and I congratulate the US for getting the jobs up. So, but these jobs are missing in Germany, and that's very clear. And the 15% I'm talking about are not the only exports that Germany is losing. There are even other exports, like for electric cars. I don't believe that anybody in China would buy a German electric car anymore, and that was one of the biggest export markets for German cars. And so when I talk with people from the supplier industry, they brace themselves. They say that the German supplier industry will be halved within about 7 years' time. So when I take the average of the people I'm asking, and I'm doing a survey all the time, and that means that the German car part supply industry would shrink from currently 3 million people to 1.5 million. And that is a number. 1.5.
So Martin, it's sort of interesting with this, turkey syndrome, or I forget what
Illusion.
What
Turkey
is it?
illusion.
Turkey conclusion?
Illusion. It's just
Illusion.
an illusion,
Okay.
like the
So
song.
the turkey illusion, certainly plays a pivotal role right now in the U.S. because of our president's view on bringing back manufacturing, but bringing back manufacturing, unless you already have a plant here, is very difficult to do in a very short time frame, right? Going from a green field, meaning there's no infrastructure, there's no structure there at all, just a field, and you're going to put a new plant in. Depending on the technology that you're involved in, or the industry and or industry, I mean, building a new plant is 2, 3, 4 years away, right? And it's not overnight. Plus, the American public has a very, very poor attitude and very poor view of manufacturing. And they still see manufacturing as a job they don't want to do.
Really? Wow.
So there's a number of different issues that we're faced with, and in this time of turbulence that we're in.
And as we've mentioned, building that plant 3 years out still has a funding problem, and that it's way too risky for conventional investors to create a glorified business that makes millions but doesn't return over 20% ROI.
Yep. Yep.
Well, Joe and Rich, I think it depends, okay? If you're assembling something in Mexico and Trump says bring it back to Pennsylvania or whatever, and putting up an assembly plant, it's as easy as putting up a Costco store. You tilt up, you put a roof on, and you got 500,000 square feet of assembling something. The 787, I think, is made in the Southeast somewhere rather than Seattle or Everett or Renton, Washington. So assembling an aircraft is just assembly. Now, if you're going to do a steel mill, okay, so Trump says bring steel back to Pennsylvania, get it out of Mexico, or cut off your supply from Korea because you're going to get hit with a tariff. So you don't build a steel plant as quickly as you can put up an assembly plant. A pharmaceutical plant, I think, can be cloned a lot easier. A semiconductor plant is probably harder than pharmaceutical. So, you know, you need to pick a site that has clean water, clean air, on and on and on for semiconductor. You might get away with something a little dirtier for pharmaceutical, depending on what you're making. But I think assembling circuit boards, Rich, compared to semiconductor, there are clients that I've had, and all of a sudden, 3 weeks later, they're putting circuit boards together in Chihuahua, Mexico, and they get hit with a tariff, and they bring it back to Texas. So
Yeah,
I think
but
it depends on what you're doing.
yeah, well, exactly. I don't disagree, Michael. I mean, a circuit board is easy versus building a semiconductor. A new chip takes years to design, develop, prototype, and then put into production. I mean, a piece of semiconductor equipment has a 18-month to 2-year waiting list. I mean, you take a
I
look
got
at
some insights from a semiconductor manufacturer. It's one of the big Taiwanese, and without disclosing who and so on and so forth, but they absolutely complained about the bad job attitudes of the Americans, and yeah, I was the fly on the wall. And their yield was half of this of the identical Taiwanese factory. So this manager was pretty outspoken on this, and then he said they have so much vacation and so on. And I said, "Oh my God! And you're thinking to move to Germany or to open a fab in Germany? Good luck." So it's true. It takes forever for a semiconductor fab to get up and running. Take, for example, the latest and greatest disaster from Wolfspeed. Besides, they are in deep depths. They thought they are going into a 8-inch, 200 millimeter wafer technology. This is the latest and greatest, and they are far ahead, and so on and so forth. But I don't want to be the factory floor manager if my yield is 20%. This is what they are getting out of their production.
In
And now
Germany,
they found
20%.
in Mohawk in the US. So yeah, getting jobs back. Depends what you are going to plan. And to finish this off, also in Germany, uh, when you see the supplier base and so on and so forth, I get in recently a lot of requests from Serbia, from Hungary, and Romania. So this is where the manufacturing is being sent over, similar to the US who manufacture in Mexico.
Yeah, but
So
Jürgen, that not but yes, and this is exactly what I'm saying. Germany, the export of vehicles produced in Germany will shrink, and I believe by something like 75% over a period of 7 years, 10 years, and 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 that's because the export is falling away because the vehicles are made where they are needed and no longer in Germany and then exported from there to other countries. And that will have an impact on the workforce in Germany. And the 150,000 workers in the car industry that you have mentioned is only those guys who really work for the manufacturers themselves, and not
yeah, and those are the guys who buy cars. Think about that. It's a spiral.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. And that's the turkey effect, that we see, right?
Yes.
Hey, Martin, I want to add, I think there's a difference between a turkey and the ostrich. People used to talk about companies that get blindsided because they had their head in the soil like an ostrich. Now, the turkey is fat, dumb, and happy. The ostrich is a little different now. The ostrich is just stupid his whole life. He's not fat, dumb, and happy, nor does he have a farmer. He's just his brain is totally oblivious to what's going on around him. At least the turkey knows when the axe is coming. The ostrich has been dumb its whole life.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's a
Good.
subtlety. That's a subtlety that is maybe, I don't know for what to use that one. Maybe I still get some ideas about from that, but yeah. Yeah. What that's what I'm saying, and this is why we are. That's a deeper reason why I'm putting so much effort into this. Being a German patent attorney and being a car mechanic myself, and I work with the car industry for many years of my professional life. I really see some need to help those supplier companies to survive what is coming. I believe that the big car manufacturers don't need help because they know exactly what they need to do, namely to shift production where the cars are needed, and they are doing that. And it's not even, I wouldn't even blame them for that because this is what they need to do. But the problem are the small and medium-sized enterprises that just did one thing for the past 30 years, namely, for example, heat treating of some body components so that they withstand corrosion better, or other stuff. And these people are the ones that need help. They have a revenue of a million or two per year, and now they see that they're really at the end of the S curve. And that's the first thing. If you don't have a model like the S curve, then how would you know that the current curve is flattening? You wouldn't see the signs of the time, right? And that's why I think it's so important that we need to teach people to use the measurement system that we have created over the years. And one thing has been added last week by Frank Mattes is the business model canvas. There's a new measurement system for me. That's why I find it so revolutionary. Anyway, we have reached the end of our hour. Anyone wants to say a final word to what we do? If not, then I would close here. Thanks for everyone. You see that our reviews are becoming better and faster because we have reinforced our team. And you will read on LinkedIn about what has been spoken today. Thank you again, everyone, and see you next week. Goodbye.
Take care, everybody.
Thank,
Take care.
thank you, Martin.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.